So in this demo, we're going to go ahead and cover element parameter states. This includes type parameters, instance parameters as well. We're going to start off with instance parameters and then have a discussion on type parameters. We're going to look at how to extract this data from Revit. So we're going to begin to look at how to get those parameter values. We're going to look at the logic behind the data and cover the data types that we receive from Revit within Dynamo as well. What we'll go ahead and do is open up Revit 2017 once again. So I already have it open, so let me pop that open right now. And we'll go ahead and navigate to the sample architecture project just like we did before. Once we're in this project, I'll just jump to a 3D view and close my hidden windows. Since we will be extracting data from this model within Dynamo, I'll go ahead and open Dynamo. Once we have Dynamo open, we'll just click on New to start a new graph. And we can see a blank canvas ready to go. So we want to start pulling data from our Revit model. So we've covered how to collect elements. Now we just need to cover how to begin to pull data from those elements. In this case, we're going to work with a single wall. So we're going to go ahead and select this wall. The way we're going to do that is with a single select model element node that we've used before. So if we go to Revit, selection, and navigate down to select model element, we can place that node on our canvas. I'll just drag this to the left, click on select, and we can now select that one wall. So we can see that I have an element selected now. And if I put a watch node once again to see what it's doing, I can see that I have one wall selected. So I want to start to extract data from this element. So if I click on the wall in Revit, I can see all the instance parameters displayed on the properties palette. All of these are parameters that are accessible right now in Dynamo to me. So let's say we wanted to get like unconnected height. We can go ahead and do that. So the logic behind grabbing this data from Revit is I want to extract it or get that data. So if I look in my node library, I can go ahead and remove the selection, just toggle that to drop it down. I'm modifying elements right now by getting data from them. So I'll navigate to the elements bin. This is kind of a generic thing that I'm doing, so it'll apply to any element. So I'll expand element, and I could see a group called create, indicated by that plus sign. Create means that I'm actually getting some data or messing with some data or obtaining it. So I mentioned that I want to extract or get some parameter values. So if I click on the get parameter value by name node, drop that on my canvas, I could see that it wants a few inputs. So one of the input types is a Revit element. Previously we selected a wall element, a single wall element specifically. So I can go ahead and tie element to element just like we have before. I have a watch node down here which also has an output. I don't like to use the outputs on watch nodes. I just always drag those to the side just to monitor what's going on. It's just kind of something I do. You can use that as well if you really wanted to. Aside from the element input, Dynamo is wondering what parameter name to look up. So I need to tell Dynamo what data I want to get from that Revit element. So we can see what kind of input type a node needs by just hovering over the input. And in this case, this one wants a string input. So all a string is in our case is text. So a way to put in text. So if we want to put a string input into this parameter name, that's another node type within Dynamo. So if I go into my search tab on my library, my node library, and type in str for string, that pops up. I can see that this is an input node, so it's used for inputs. I click on it to drop it on my canvas, and I can begin to type in it. So we wanted to get unconnected height. If I tie this into parameter name, I now gave Dynamo something to look at. Right now it's blank. I did that on purpose because Dynamo is case sensitive with parameter names. So if I hover over unconnected height in Revit, I could see that the U is capitalized and the H is capitalized. That's really important to keep in mind because you want to get the data, you would have to type it correctly for it to obtain it. So if I change that, I could see Dynamo Update and it tells me 3500. If I tile this window over to the left, I'll just minimize it. I can see that it matches the parameter value within Revit as well. So that wall is 3,500 millimeters high. So this one's in metric, but that value matches it. So if that value were to change, this changes as well. So Dynamo constantly monitors that value. What's really cool about getting data with Dynamo from Revit is if I were to select this wall and create a schedule of walls, I'm able to schedule a lot of stuff for wall elements, one of which is not if it's room bounding. So you can't schedule if a wall is room bounding at all. So even some of these read-only parameters we can begin to get with Dynamo. So if I jump back into Dynamo, I can just update my string to say room bounding. I can see that I got a value from that. So a 1 indicates a yes value. So that wall is room bounding. If I were to deselect that, it's going to tell me that my room's not in the enclosed region. I'll just click OK for now. Jump back into Dynamo. I can see that it's now 0. So I'm extracting a data value that's not schedulable in Revit, which is really awesome. That's something that Revit can't do on its own. Dynamo's doing it, and you can start to use this data to do other things and tie it to other places as well, which is huge. It's really useful. I mentioned before this is an instance parameter because this is a single wall instance. If we wanted to get to some of the type parameters, we can do that as well. If I click on Edit Type, I can see more parameter values. So if you're familiar with Revit, you are familiar with instance parameters and type parameters. Type parameters will apply to every wall of this type. So like if I wanted to obtain the keynote value of this wall, I would have to get the type of wall first. So for extracting type parameters from a wall, for instance, we just need to obtain that wall type. If we want to look at getting that an out-of-the-box way, there's a way to do that. We'll cover a few nodes here for that. What I'll do is just drag my select model element over to the left and disconnect it from my parameter value. And we wanted to get the keynote, I believe. So if we edit type, we can see keynote. So I'll go ahead and update my string to say keynote as well. We can also see that my get parameter value by name says function. That means it's waiting for more inputs, which is fine. We'll leave it waiting for now. So if I expand my library, I can actually search for, so a clever way of getting a wall type is to get the name of the wall, and then there's a cool node in Dynamo to get the wall type based on its name. So if we search for element.name, we can get the name of the element. So this is a good way of doing this. If it has a dot within it, so it's element.name, we're obtaining something from an element. So you can see element.get parameter as well. So from my wall, I'll tie it into element.name, and I can see that I have a wall name. I mentioned that we can do a wall type by name. So in the node library, if I go to Revit, Elements, and Wall Type, I can see under the Create group, I have a by name. So wall type by name. This is looking for a name, which I can see is a string input. My output of element.name is a string as well. If I tie that in, this one becomes a dark gray because it's fulfilled, and I now obtain that wall's type, which is really useful because this opens up a whole nother layer of possibilities for extracting data. I already prepared my keynote for my string on my get parameter value by name, so now it's just waiting for an element. If I tie in my wall type, I can see that I have the keynote value, which is a type parameter for all walls of that type. That's really useful because now I'm obtaining parameters that are through the type selection. I can also change those parameters, which we'll cover when we begin to manipulate data within Revit and Dynamo. So something else that's really useful about this process is if I wanted to grab a few more model elements, so a few different walls, and collect all these parameters as well, I can do that. If I go to Revit, my Revit bin, I can go to selection, and we'll do a select model elements plural. So what I'll also do is I'll come in and I'll select a few wall types that I know are different, and I'll isolate those with HI on my keyboard. So now that I have those isolated, I'm ready to select them with Dynamo. So I clicked on select, I'll do a crossing window, and I grabbed all those walls. So I can see that in here as well. So if I wanted to get the keynote value for all those walls, I can simply reuse this right half of my graph. If I tie that in, I can see that I have the wall type for 2 of my walls. A couple of them share keynotes, one doesn't have a keynote, and I accidentally grabbed some split faces as well. So those don't have a keynote value, so that's why that'll say that. This isn't really a problem, it's just kind of something that I grabbed. So I can refresh my selection as well, and just grab a couple of walls. So Dynamo is constantly updating, and it's constantly looking at my Revit document. That applies for instance parameters and everything like that. So if we were to do stuff like category selection that we were doing a little while earlier, we can grab all of our walls. Once again, we'll get all of the elements of that category. So this is what we did before. And we'll obtain the unconnected height. I'll tie that into element. And I'll see that Dynamo updated, and I'll throw a watch node in. So now for every one of these walls, I have their height. So I can start to do really cool things with this. That's what we'll do a little while later. And just be able to start to pull that data from the Revit model. So we've obtained instance parameters and type parameters as they apply to walls in this portion. So let's review what we went over in this demo. We covered some of the various element parameter states. This includes type parameters and instance parameters, specifically as they applied to a wall element within Revit. We also covered extracting data as it pertains to those parameters from Revit with Dynamo. We looked at getting the parameters, so we obtained some instance parameters and type parameters from walls within Revit inside of Dynamo. So type parameters had a few more steps to obtain, but we went over that as well. We also covered the data types that are used for inputs for some of the nodes and the outputs for some of the nodes as well. So specifically, we went over string inputs for specifying parameter names within Dynamo, and we looked at the unconnected height of a wall, which is a number data value. So we covered that in this demo as well. So this is the framework for obtaining that Revit data and being able to extract and mine your Revit model for that data.